I want to tell you about a time that an email made me cry. Um, it was around 6:30 in the morning. I was standing in the candidate as a general election, and first thing in the morning is the only time I could wade through all the emails that you get from people at that time. The subject line read, "Supporting kinship care." I wasn't sure what that was, and I thought I have to do some reading up on this. But the email went on to explain there are 200,000 children in the United Kingdom who cannot live with their parents and are being raised by kinship carers, i.e. grandparents, older siblings, other relatives or friends. And I stopped in my tracks. I did know what that was. That was me. A little after my 15th birthday, I moved out of my parents' home and into the care of my grandparents. My childhood wasn't really a happy one. There were daily arguments, fights, and it only got worse in my teens. Eventually, the relationship with my parents broke down entirely. I moved out, and besides a few botched reunion attempts, I didn't speak to them for the best part of 10 years. Now, we never went for any legal process or sought any help. We saw no reason to. I was just living with different family members and nobody had to know. My grandparents lived in a council house and they were living off a state pension. So it couldn't have been easy for them to take on a teenager at that time. And I wish there had been support for them because they probably needed it. My grandparents did an amazing job with me. After a childhood full of conflict, they showered me with love. And it was just what I needed. I went from being an angry teenager, starting to let his schoolwork slip away from him, to being the first person in my family to make it to university. There is simply no way I would have turned things around like that had it not been for my grandparents taking me on. Just imagine the alternatives. One, I stayed in an unhappy home full of conflict and continued on a downward path. The other, with no grandparents around to take me on, I leave my parents anyway and go into the care system. At 15 years old, as an angry teenager, not far away from legal independence. The care system does great work, but I don't like the sound of my chances at that point. So it was the love of my grandparents that not only saved me from a negative pathway, but managed to turn my life around entirely. That's not to say it was all plain sailing. In my 20s, I suffered from depression. The trauma of separation from my parents, however much I like to think it didn't at the time, really affected me. I spent a lot of time in counselling, period on antidepressants, and it was a struggle. Now, I'm really grateful that I was able to afford private counselling sessions, but I fear for other young people like me who can't access the mental health support they need, and we really need to fix that. I'm sad to say that my grandparents are no longer with me, but this story does have a happy ending. When my granddad, or Pops as I used to know him, when he passed away, it triggered the first reconciliation moment with my parents. Progress was slow, but we took it step by step. And by the time my nan passed a few years later, I was able to lean on my parents once again for support. I don't think that would have been possible if it wasn't for the love of my grandparents. What they invested in me gave me the space to change my ways, mature, grow into a person that could find acceptance for the past. Kinship care, family looking after family. It hardwires into the care system a special quality that's difficult to produce through other means: love. So let's give this special kind of care the recognition and support it needs. And maybe next time someone like me receives an email with kinship care in the subject line, they will already know what it is. Thanks.